I'd always believed that hard work and loyalty were the cornerstones of success. In life, in love, in everything. So when Cassandra, my wife of 10 years, walked into my office with a man I barely recognized, I thought it was some kind of joke. The kind of cruel, twisted prank that leaves you speechless for a moment before the punchline arrives. But there was no punchline. Instead, there was Cassandra's cold, calculated voice as she smiled and introduced Victor, a man who'd been working in the lower ranks of the company for the past year. "Victor will be taking over your position as CEO," she said, her tone dripping with false professionalism. "Effective immediately." I stared at her, trying to process her words, trying to make sense of the absurdity unfolding before me. My mind raced, searching for context, for logic. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice strained but steady. She tilted her head slightly, a hint of amusement playing on her lips. "It's all been arranged, Daniel. The board has been briefed, and they agree Victor is better suited for the role. You've done a commendable job, but it's time for new leadership." Commendable job? I'd built this company from the ground up. I'd poured my blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights into making it what it was today. And now she was telling me, no, announcing to me that I was being replaced? By her lover, no less? Victor stood there with a smug smile, as if he'd already won. His arrogance was palpable, his posture too casual for someone who was supposedly about to take over a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I wanted to wipe that grin off his face, but instead, I turned my attention back to Cassandra. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice rising. "This company is my life. You can't just hand it over to him." She shrugged, her indifference cutting deeper than I'd expected. "It's not just me, Daniel. The board agrees. They're tired of your methods, your outdated approach. Victor represents innovation, fresh ideas. It's what the company needs to stay competitive." I could barely hear her over the roar of my own thoughts. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. My mind reeled, flashing through a dozen scenarios, each more incredulous than the last. Had I missed something? Had I been so focused on the company, on making sure everything ran smoothly, that I'd failed to see the cracks forming in my own marriage? In my own office? "You've been conspiring behind my back," I said, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. "Both of you. How long has this been going on?" Cassandra's expression didn't waver. If anything, she seemed almost bored. "Long enough," she said simply, as if that were answer enough. Victor finally spoke, his voice as slimy as his demeanor. "It's nothing personal, Daniel. It's just business. You've had your time, and now it's mine. I'll take good care of what you've built." The audacity of his words nearly sent me over the edge. I took a step forward, fists clenched, but Cassandra raised a hand as if to stop me. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said, her tone sharp. "You can't win this fight. The decision's already been made." I stared at her, this woman I'd once loved more than anything, and felt something inside me break. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it left me momentarily paralyzed. She'd been my partner, my confidant, the person I'd trusted above all others. And now she was tearing everything apart. But beneath the shock and the hurt, something else stirred. Anger, determination, a refusal to let them take everything I'd worked for without a fight. "We'll see about that," I said, my voice low and steady. I turned on my heel and walked out of the office, ignoring Victor's smug expression and Cassandra's carefully composed indifference. As I left the building, my mind was already racing, formulating a plan. If they thought they could blindside me and walk away unscathed, they were sorely mistaken. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The betrayal was real, but so was my resolve. And as I drove away, the anger bubbling beneath the surface turned into something sharper, more focused. They wanted a fight? They'd get one. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and my jaw ached from clenching my teeth. The disbelief from earlier had given way to a smoldering anger. Betrayal didn't just happen overnight. I knew that. But how long had Cassandra been planning this? How long had she been looking me in the eye, saying she loved me, while plotting my downfall behind my back? As I parked in the driveway and stepped inside the house we'd shared for years, everything felt different. The walls that once felt warm and familiar now seemed cold and hollow. The photos of us on the mantel, vacations, anniversaries, quiet moments of joy, mocked me with their false promises of a life that was supposed to be ours. I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glass as though it might hold the answers. And then, like floodgates opening, the memories started pouring in. Little moments that I'd brushed off at the time, but now seemed glaringly obvious. There was the way she'd been distant over the past year, always too busy to sit down for dinner or watch a movie together. The late-night phone calls she dismissed as work emergencies. The sudden interest in Victor's department, claiming she wanted to mentor rising talent within the company. I'd seen it all, but I'd been too trusting, too naive, to connect the dots. One memory in particular hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a weekend not long ago. I'd suggested we take a trip to the coast, just the two of us, to reconnect. She'd smiled faintly, almost pityingly, and said, "Not now, Daniel. There's too much going on at work." At the time, I chalked it up to stress. Now I realized it was because she didn't want to be with me. The anger simmered, but it was no longer aimless. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. If Cassandra and Victor thought I'd roll over and let them take everything I'd built, they didn't know me at all. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to win. I opened my laptop and started combing through emails, company reports, anything that might hint at their scheme. If they'd been conspiring for as long as I suspected, there had to be a trail. As I dug deeper, I began to see the cracks in their plan. Emails between Cassandra and Victor that seemed innocuous at first glance, but hinted at private meetings. Financial reports that didn't quite add up. And then there were the whispers I'd overheard in the office, rumors about budget reallocations and abrupt policy changes. By the time the sun began to rise, I'd pieced together enough to confirm what I already knew. This wasn't just about taking my position. It was about seizing control of the entire company. Cassandra's confidence wasn't arrogance. It was rooted in careful planning and manipulation. But she'd underestimated me. Over the next few days, I played the part of the defeated man. I showed up to work as if nothing had happened, my demeanor calm but detached. Cassandra and Victor seemed pleased with themselves, their smugness practically radiating off them. But beneath my composed exterior, I was working tirelessly to dismantle their plans. Every free moment was spent gathering evidence, reaching out to trusted allies within the company, and strategizing my next move. I wasn't just going to expose their betrayal. I was going to make sure they could never recover from it. In the meantime, Cassandra seemed more emboldened than ever. She'd taken to parading Victor around the office, introducing him as the future of the company. Her smile was dazzling, her charm undeniable. But to me, it was nothing more than a mask, a facade hiding the betrayal underneath. Victor, for his part, seemed eager to prove himself. He spoke in meetings with an air of authority, as though he'd already assumed my role. The employees were polite but wary. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They weren't convinced, and neither was I. Late one night, as I sat in my study surrounded by stacks of documents, I stumbled upon something that made my breath catch. An email chain between Victor and an outside contractor, detailing a lucrative deal that was anything but above board. The numbers didn't lie. Victor was engaging in fraud, using company resources for personal gain. And Cassandra? She'd signed off on it. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the leverage I needed. But I couldn't act too soon. If I tipped my hand now, they'd have time to cover their tracks. No, I needed to be patient. I needed to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The betrayal was a fire that burned deep in my chest, but it wasn't a destructive blaze. It was controlled, purposeful, and as I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, a small, grim smile tugged at the corners of my lips. They thought they'd won. They thought I was defeated. But they had no idea what was coming. The boardroom felt colder than usual, its long table stretching out like a battlefield. Cassandra, with her unshakable poise and polished smile, sat at the head, exuding an air of triumph. Victor was next to her, leaning back in his chair as though he already owned the place. They were here to push their agenda, their takeover, and I was expected to sit silently, nodding along as if I didn't see the strings they were pulling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cassandra began, her voice smooth and confident, "I'm excited to share the vision for this company's future. As you know, Victor has proven himself an invaluable asset over the past year. His innovative strategies and forward-thinking approach are exactly what we need to stay competitive in an ever-changing market." The board members nodded politely, though a few exchanged skeptical glances. I'd worked with most of them for years. They knew me, knew the work I'd put in to build this company. But Cassandra was persuasive, and Victor was putting on a convincing show of confidence. "Victor's proposal," Cassandra continued, gesturing toward him, "will not only streamline operations but also position us as leaders in the industry. His plan focuses on efficiency, innovation, and, most importantly, profitability." Victor leaned forward, his tone measured and authoritative. "With all due respect to Daniel's contributions, it's clear that the company has been stagnating. My strategies are designed to revitalize growth and ensure long-term success. This isn't about replacing anyone. It's about progress." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. Their words were carefully chosen, crafted to make it seem like this was all for the good of the company. But I knew better. This wasn't about progress or innovation. It was about power. "Daniel," one of the board members said, breaking the tension, "what's your take on this? You've been notably quiet." All eyes turned to me. I could feel Cassandra and Victor watching, waiting for me to lash out, to confirm their narrative that I was stuck in my ways and incapable of adapting. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I leaned forward, meeting the board members' gaze. "I appreciate the focus on innovation," I said evenly, "but I'd like to understand the specifics of Victor's proposal. What exactly does he plan to change, and how will those changes impact our employees and stakeholders?" Victor's confident facade faltered for a split second, but Cassandra stepped in seamlessly. "The details are outlined in the proposal," she said smoothly. "We've already conducted preliminary assessments, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive." "I'm sure it has," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "But as someone who's been with this company from the beginning, I'd like to ensure that any changes align with our core values and the culture we've built." There was a murmur of agreement from a few board members. Cassandra's smile tightened, but she quickly recovered. "Of course," she said. "We're committed to maintaining the company's integrity while pursuing growth." I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "Then I look forward to reviewing the proposal in detail." The meeting continued, with Cassandra and Victor presenting their vision with practiced ease. They spoke of modernization and streamlining, using all the buzzwords designed to impress. But as I watched them, I couldn't help but notice the cracks in their performance. Victor's overconfidence, Cassandra's occasional slip into condescension. They were so focused on winning that they didn't see the subtle shift in the room. The board wasn't fully convinced. Not yet. After the meeting, I lingered in the hallway, casually speaking with a few board members. Their concerns were clear. Victor's lack of experience, Cassandra's sudden push for drastic changes, the overall uncertainty surrounding their plan. I listened carefully, offering reassurances where I could without revealing too much. "Daniel," one board member said quietly, "I hope you're not planning to step aside without a fight. This company wouldn't exist without you." I met his gaze, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Don't worry," I said. "I have no intention of going anywhere." That night, I sat in my study, reviewing the notes I'd taken during the meeting. Every point they'd made, every question they'd dodged, was fuel for my plan. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to dismantle their scheme piece by piece. Cassandra and Victor thought they'd already won. They thought they could charm and manipulate their way to the top. But they were about to learn that the foundation I'd built wasn't so easily shaken. Let the games begin. The quiet hum of my office was a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in my mind. For weeks, I'd played along, letting Cassandra and Victor believe I was a defeated man. But behind the scenes, every moment of my time had been dedicated to uncovering the truth, the full scope of their betrayal. I'd always known there was more to their plan than a simple power grab. Cassandra wasn't the type to risk everything unless she was certain of the outcome. And Victor? He was too smug, too confident for someone so new to the upper echelons of the corporate world. They were hiding something, and I was determined to find it. It started with the financial reports. Late one night, after everyone had left the building, I combed through years of data, searching for discrepancies. It didn't take long to find the first crack, a series of payments to a consultant whose name I didn't recognize. The amounts were significant, and the descriptions vague. It was enough to raise suspicion, but not enough to act on. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. The consultant was a shell company, and the payments were being funneled directly to Victor. Cassandra's name appeared on several of the approvals, tying her to the scheme. But it didn't stop there. I uncovered emails between Victor and an outside vendor, outlining a deal that blatantly violated company policy. The numbers didn't just lie, they screamed fraud. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the evidence on my screen. This was more than enough to expose them, but I knew better than to act rashly. If I tipped my hand too soon, they'd find a way to spin it, to bury the truth before I could bring it to light. No, I needed more. The following day, I reached out to a trusted IT specialist within the company. Discreetly, I told him, I need access to any correspondence between Cassandra and Victor. Look for anything unusual. He hesitated, his loyalty to the company evident in his furrowed brow. But when I assured him this was about protecting the integrity of the business, he agreed. What he found was damning. Emails detailing their plans to manipulate the board, to discredit me, to consolidate power. They'd even discussed ways to frame me for financial mismanagement, a preemptive strike in case I fought back. The sheer audacity of it all left me both furious and impressed. They'd thought of everything, except for the possibility that I'd be one step ahead. I saved every piece of evidence, compiling it into a comprehensive file. Each document, each email, was another nail in their coffin. But I wasn't done. If I was going to confront them, I needed to ensure there was no room for doubt, no cracks in my case they could exploit. Late one night, I found myself sitting in my car outside a small, nondescript office building. It belonged to the vendor involved in Victor's fraudulent deal. Posing as a potential client, I'd arranged a meeting to discuss business opportunities. It was risky, but I needed confirmation straight from the source. The vendor, a wiry man with shifty eyes, seemed eager to impress. He talked at length about his partnership with Victor, unaware of who I really was. When I subtly steered the conversation toward the questionable payments, his demeanor shifted. He grew defensive, evasive. But in his nervous ramblings, he let slip enough to confirm what I already suspected. Victor had been using company resources to line his own pockets, and Cassandra had facilitated it. As I drove home that night, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I had everything I needed. The evidence was airtight, the truth undeniable. They'd played their game well, but they hadn't anticipated facing someone willing to fight back with the same ruthlessness they'd shown. In the days that followed, I finalized my preparations. I met with a lawyer to ensure the evidence was legally sound, and I reached out to key allies on the board, subtly gauging their trust in Cassandra and Victor. Their skepticism was evident, and I knew I had their attention. All that remained was the right moment to strike. The anticipation was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. I'd spent years building this company, and now it was on the line. But this wasn't just about the business. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about standing up to the people who tried to tear me down. As I sat in my office one evening, reviewing the evidence one last time, I allowed myself a small smile. Cassandra and Victor thought they'd outsmarted me, that they'd won. But they were about to learn the hard way that I wasn't someone to be underestimated. The company's largest conference room buzzed with a tense energy as the board members filed in, their conversations hushed but curious. Today was the day Cassandra and Victor would present their grand vision for the company, a vision built on lies and manipulation. I sat at the far end of the table, calm but alert, ready to counter their every move. Cassandra began the presentation with her usual poise, her polished exterior betraying none of the duplicity I'd uncovered. She outlined their proposed strategy with slides and charts, speaking of innovation, sustainability, and competitive advantage. Victor chimed in occasionally, his tone self-assured, as if he'd already been anointed the company's savior. They were good. I'd give them that. But they were overconfident, too sure of their control over the room. When Cassandra finished, she turned to the board with an expectant smile. "This is the future of our company," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "With Victor's leadership, we'll achieve unprecedented growth." The board members murmured among themselves, some nodding, others exchanging skeptical glances. I waited, letting the tension build, before raising my hand slightly. The room quieted. "I have a few questions," I said evenly, meeting Cassandra's gaze. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Of course, Daniel," she said, her tone sugary sweet. "What's on your mind?" I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. "Victor, you've talked a lot about your plans for the company, but I'd like to hear more about your track record. Could you walk us through your accomplishments prior to joining us?" Victor hesitated, his polished demeanor cracking slightly. "Well, as you know, I've been instrumental in streamlining operations here, which has already yielded positive results." "Yes," I said, nodding, "but I'm asking about your previous experience. What specific projects or leadership roles prepared you for this position?" The room grew quiet as the board members leaned in, their interest piqued. Victor stammered out a vague response, citing general management experience and innovative initiatives, but the lack of concrete details was glaring. "Thank you," I said, sitting back. "I'll review those initiatives in more detail later." I let the weight of my words settle before turning to Cassandra. "Cassandra, I'm curious about the financial projections you've presented. Could you explain the rationale behind reallocating resources to external contractors?" Her composure remained intact, but I saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "It's all outlined in the proposal," she said smoothly. "The contractors provide specialized expertise that's crucial for implementing these changes effectively." "Interesting," I said, "because I've noticed that some of these contractors are tied to a vendor with questionable business practices. Have we conducted due diligence to ensure their compliance with our standards?" The room shifted uneasily, and Cassandra's confident facade wavered. We've vetted all partnerships thoroughly," she said, her voice tighter than before. "Good," I replied. "I'd like to see the documentation on that vetting process." The tension in the room was palpable now. The board members' expressions ranged from curiosity to outright concern. I knew I had their attention, and I wasn't done yet. "One more question," I said, turning back to Victor. "Can you explain the payments made to a consulting firm over the past 6 months? Specifically, why those funds weren't disclosed in the regular financial reports?" Victor's face drained of color. Cassandra's hand clenched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. I'm not sure what you're referring to," Victor stammered. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "These are the payment records," I said. "They show substantial sums transferred to a shell company linked to you, Victor. And Cassandra's signature is on the approvals." Gasps rippled through the room as the board members leaned forward to examine the documents. Cassandra tried to regain control, her voice rising slightly. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "Those payments were fraudulent," I finished for her. "And that's just the beginning. I have more evidence detailing unethical practices tied to both of you. I suggest we review everything thoroughly before moving forward with any decisions." The room erupted into murmurs, the board members' trust in Cassandra and Victor crumbling before my eyes. Cassandra's expression hardened, and Victor looked as though he might faint. I'd thrown the first punch, and it had landed squarely. As the meeting adjourned, several board members approached me, their expressions a mix of gratitude and concern. "We'll get to the bottom of this," one of them said firmly. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. This was just the beginning, but the tide had turned. Cassandra and Victor had underestimated me, and now they were beginning to see the cost of their betrayal. As I left the room, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The public power play was theirs, but the real power? That was mine. The battle wasn't over, but the balance of power had shifted. I was ready for the next move. The room felt electric with anticipation as I entered the next high-stakes meeting. Today, I wasn't just countering their claims. Today, I was dropping the bombshell that would end their game for good. I took my seat, my movements deliberate and calm, as Cassandra and Victor whispered furiously to each other. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know what. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," I began, my voice steady but commanding. "I've uncovered additional information that I believe is crucial for the board to review before any further decisions are made." The board members leaned in, their interest piqued. Cassandra's smile was tight, and Victor avoided my gaze altogether. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "These," I said, "are records of unauthorized transactions, fraudulent vendor agreements, and other financial misconduct tied directly to Victor." The room went silent as I passed the documents around. The board members' eyes widened as they scanned the pages, murmurs of shock rippling through the group. "But that's not all," I continued, my gaze shifting to Cassandra. "Here are emails and approval forms signed by Cassandra herself, implicating her in the embezzlement of company funds." Gasps filled the room as I handed over the second set of evidence. Cassandra's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd," she snapped. "These documents must be fabricated." "They're not," I replied coolly. "They've been verified by a third-party forensic accountant. The evidence is irrefutable." Victor stood, his face red with panic. "This is a setup. He's trying to discredit us." "Discredit you?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "You did that yourselves when you decided to defraud this company. The evidence speaks for itself." The board's chairman cleared his throat, his expression grim. "We need to review this thoroughly," he said. "Effective immediately, Victor and Cassandra are suspended from all company activities pending the outcome of this investigation." Cassandra's eyes blazed with fury, but she said nothing. Victor slumped back into his chair, defeated. The room buzzed with tension as the meeting adjourned, the weight of their betrayal hanging heavy in the air. As I walked out, a sense of relief washed over me. The bombshell had landed, and the fallout was just beginning. Cassandra and Victor had underestimated me, but now the truth was out, and there was no going back. The fallout was immediate and relentless. News of the scandal spread like wildfire through the company and beyond. Employees whispered in hallways, emails circulated with speculation, and by the afternoon, the story had leaked to the media. Victor's face, once smug and self-assured, was now plastered across news articles with headlines screaming of fraud and misconduct. Cassandra, too, found herself under a glaring spotlight, her polished reputation crumbling under the weight of the evidence. For the first time, she seemed shaken, her confidence replaced by an uneasy tension whenever she stepped into the office. That is, before her suspension was made public. The company's board wasted no time convening an emergency session. The evidence I'd presented had left no room for doubt. Their first order of business was to ensure the integrity of the organization, which meant distancing themselves entirely from Cassandra and Victor. By the end of the day, both were officially removed from their positions, effective immediately. Security escorted Victor out of the building, his protests falling on deaf ears. Cassandra's departure was quieter, though no less significant. She cleared out her office with an almost mechanical efficiency, her face betraying none of the turmoil I knew she must have been feeling. As she walked past my office on her way out, she hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to speak. I met her gaze but said nothing. Whatever words she had to offer, I wasn't interested. She turned and left without a word. The employees, meanwhile, were caught between shock and relief. Many had suspected something was amiss, but hadn't dared to voice their concerns. Now that the truth was out, there was an undeniable sense of vindication among the staff. Meetings were held to address the situation, with the board reassuring employees that steps were being taken to stabilize the company and prevent future misconduct. I threw myself into the work of rebuilding. There was no time to dwell on the personal betrayal. The company needed strong leadership now more than ever. Days blurred into nights as I reviewed policies, implemented stricter oversight protocols, and worked closely with the board to restore confidence among stakeholders. The media coverage was a double-edged sword. While it brought negative attention to the company, it also highlighted our swift action in addressing the scandal. Statements were issued emphasizing our commitment to integrity and transparency, and I made sure to be the face of those efforts. Interviews, press releases, and shareholder meetings became my new normal. Through it all, the anger that had fueled me during those early days of discovery began to ebb. It was replaced by a grim determination to move forward, to ensure that the company emerged from this stronger than before. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but the challenges felt manageable now that the lies and deceit were no longer lurking in the shadows. Victor, unsurprisingly, tried to shift the blame. In interviews with any media outlet that would listen, he painted himself as a scapegoat, claiming he'd been manipulated by Cassandra. His arguments fell flat, though, as the evidence against him was overwhelming. Legal proceedings loomed on the horizon for both him and Cassandra, and their once glamorous facade had all but shattered. Cassandra, for her part, remained uncharacteristically silent in the public eye. It was almost eerie, given her previous confidence and charm. But silence didn't equate to invisibility. The scandal had made her a pariah in the business world, her name synonymous with betrayal and failure. Despite everything, there were moments when I found myself reflecting on our past. It was impossible not to. The woman who had once been my partner, my confidant, now felt like a stranger. I wondered if there had been signs I'd missed, opportunities to fix what was broken before it spiraled out of control. But those thoughts were fleeting, drowned out by the reality of her choices and the consequences she now faced. The company began to stabilize in the weeks that followed. Employees rallied together, united by a shared determination to move past the scandal. Clients who had wavered in the wake of the revelations began to renew their commitments, reassured by our efforts to right the ship. One evening, as I sat in my office going over the day's reports, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Cassandra. "Daniel," the message read, "I know I have no right to ask this, but I need to talk to you. Please." I stared at the screen for a long time, my emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to leave her words unanswered like she had left so many of mine in the past. But another part of me, the part that had loved her once, felt a flicker of curiosity. What could she possibly have to say now? I didn't respond, not that night. Instead, I set the phone aside and returned to my work, focusing on the future rather than the wreckage she had left behind. There would be time to confront those ghosts, but for now, my priority was clear: rebuild, restore, and move forward. In the weeks following Cassandra and Victor's removal, the dust began to settle, but the emotional storm within me was far from over. While the company slowly found its footing, I was left grappling with the deeper, more personal aspects of their betrayal. Work had become my refuge, a distraction from the unanswered questions and lingering anger that refused to fade. But the quiet moments, the evenings alone in my house, the weekends without plans, were harder to endure. It was on one of those quiet nights that I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at a photo of Cassandra and me from years ago. We were at a company event, her arm looped through mine, both of us smiling as if we had the world figured out. I'd thought we were unstoppable back then, partners in every sense of the word. How had we gone from that to this? Her message still sat unread on my phone. The words, simple as they were, carried a weight I wasn't sure I wanted to bear. "I need to talk to you." I'd spent countless hours wondering what she could possibly have to say, but I hadn't mustered the will to respond. Was it an apology? A justification? Or something else entirely? Eventually, I decided it was time to face it, to face her. Ignoring the message wouldn't change what had happened, and maybe hearing her out would help me move on. Or maybe it would just reopen wounds I was trying desperately to heal. Either way, I needed to know. I replied with a single word: tomorrow. The next day, she arrived at my office. It was the first time we'd been in the same room since her departure, and the tension was palpable. She looked different, not physically, but there was a heaviness in her demeanor that hadn't been there before. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching out between us like an unbridgeable chasm. "Thank you for seeing me," she said finally, her voice quieter than I remembered. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "What do you want, Cassandra?" I asked, my tone more measured than I felt. She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. I wanted to explain, she said, not to excuse what I did, but to provide context. Context? I repeated, leaning back in my chair. All right, let's hear it. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. I was scared, Daniel, she began. The company, our marriage, everything felt like it was slipping out of my control. And then Victor came along, and he made me feel important, needed, like I could finally take the reins and be something more. Her words landed like a dull thud in my chest. So what? I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. You decided to throw everything away for a chance to feel important? She flinched but didn't look away. I know how it sounds, she said, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I wanted you to understand that it wasn't about you. It was about me, my insecurities, my failures. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. Do you have any idea what you've done? I asked, not just to me, but to the company, to the people who depended on us. You didn't just betray me, Cassandra. You betrayed everyone. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I know, she said softly, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. I don't expect you to believe me, but I needed to say it. For a long moment, I said nothing. Part of me wanted to lash out, to throw her words back in her face and make her feel the depth of the pain she'd caused. But another part of me, the part that was tired of carrying that pain, just wanted to let it go. I'm not sure I'll ever understand why you did what you did, I said finally, but I'm done letting it define me. You made your choices, Cassandra, and now I'm making mine. I'm moving on. Without you. She nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. I hope you find happiness, Daniel, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I will, I replied, but not because of you. Because of me. She left quietly, and as the door closed behind her, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The weight I'd been carrying for weeks, months, finally began to lift. It wasn't closure in the traditional sense, but it was enough. Enough to let me breathe again. That evening, I returned home and poured myself a drink. As I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The company was a storm-damaged ship, its crew shaken but determined. I had taken the helm in the aftermath of Cassandra and Victor's betrayal, and though the seas were rough, I could see a clear path forward. The fallout from their actions had left deep scars, but it had also revealed the resilience of the team we'd built over the years. Now, it was time to rebuild, stronger, better, and more united than ever. One of the first steps was addressing the elephant in the room, trust. The scandal had left many employees questioning the integrity of leadership, and I knew it would take more than words to rebuild their faith. I scheduled a company-wide meeting, inviting everyone from entry-level staff to senior executives. Standing on the stage in the auditorium, I felt the weight of their eyes on me. These were the people who had given their time, talent, and loyalty to the company, only to see it exploited by those they trusted. I won't sugarcoat it, I began. What happened was a betrayal of everything we stand for. Cassandra and Victor's actions were unacceptable, and they've paid the price for their decisions. But this company is not defined by them. It's defined by all of you, by your hard work, your dedication, and your belief in what we've built together. The room was silent, the weight of my words sinking in. Moving forward, I continued. We're making changes. We're implementing stricter oversight, improving communication, and ensuring transparency at every level. This isn't just about preventing future issues. It's about creating a culture of accountability and mutual respect. We owe that to each other, and we owe it to ourselves. As I finished, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, heartfelt. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into the work of rebuilding. I met with department heads to address their concerns, listened to employees' feedback, and personally reached out to clients to reassure them of our commitment to excellence. It was exhausting, but it was also invigorating. Every step forward felt like a victory, a reminder that we were capable of rising above the damage. One of the most rewarding moments came during a brainstorming session with a group of younger employees. Their enthusiasm and creativity were infectious, and their ideas for revitalizing the company were nothing short of brilliant. It reminded me of why I'd started this journey in the first place, not just to build a business, but to create something meaningful. Outside of work, I began to rediscover parts of myself that I'd neglected for years. I took up running again, finding solace in the steady rhythm of my feet on the pavement. I reconnected with old friends, sharing laughs and memories that felt like lifelines. Slowly but surely, I was reclaiming the pieces of my life that Cassandra's betrayal had fractured. One evening, as I was leaving the office, one of the janitors stopped me. He was an older man named Greg, someone I'd exchanged pleasantries with but never really spoken to. "Mr. Blake," he said, his voice hesitant but warm, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you're doing. It means a lot to all of us." I was taken aback, but his words struck a chord. "Thank you, Greg," I said, shaking his hand. "That means more than you know." Moments like that kept me going. They reminded me that leadership wasn't about power or control. It was about responsibility and service. It was about standing tall even when everything around you was falling apart. As the months passed, the company began to thrive again. We launched new initiatives, won back old clients, and even attracted new ones. The morale among employees steadily improved, and the sense of camaraderie grew stronger than it had ever been. It wasn't just a return to normalcy. It was a transformation. One day, as I stood in the newly renovated lobby of our headquarters, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't experienced in a long time. The company was no longer a storm-damaged ship. It was a vessel rebuilt and ready to sail into uncharted waters. And I was ready to captain it, come what may. Rebuilding wasn't easy. It required patience, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the vision. But as I looked around at the faces of the people who had stood by me, who had believed in the possibility of something better, I knew it had been worth it. We'd weathered the storm, and now we were ready to embrace the future. Months later, standing at the helm of a thriving company, I finally felt a sense of closure. The journey to this point had been anything but easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every sleepless night. The betrayal that had threatened to destroy everything I'd worked for was now a distant memory, its power diminished by the strength and resilience we had cultivated in its aftermath. The company's new initiatives were thriving. Projects we had once only dreamed of were now becoming reality, fueled by a team more united than ever. The energy in the building was palpable, every corner buzzing with collaboration and creativity. It was as if the entire organization had been reborn, shedding the weight of its past to embrace a brighter future. I walked through the bustling halls, nodding to employees who greeted me with smiles and waves. Each interaction was a reminder of the trust we had rebuilt, the culture of integrity we had fought so hard to restore. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined us. Instead, they served as a testament to our ability to overcome, to persevere. As I stepped into the newly renovated boardroom, the atmosphere was different from the one I'd faced months ago. The tension and uncertainty that had once lingered were gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and optimism. The board members, who had once questioned everything in the wake of the scandal, now looked to me with confidence and respect. "Let's get started," I said, my voice steady and assured. The meeting was productive, filled with discussions of new opportunities, strategies for growth, and plans to give back to the community that had supported us through thick and thin. By the time we adjourned, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a clarity that had been elusive in those dark days of betrayal. Outside the office, my personal life had also begun to flourish. The weight of Cassandra's actions no longer haunted me, and I had started to embrace the possibilities of the future. I spent more time with friends, rekindling relationships that had taken a back seat during my years of relentless focus on work. I even found myself enjoying the simple pleasures I'd once overlooked: a quiet evening with a good book, a run through the park, a conversation that lingered long past its expected end. One evening, I found myself at a charity gala, an event hosted to support local businesses and entrepreneurs. As I mingled with the crowd, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was what it was all about. Not just building a company, but building a community, fostering connections that went beyond profit and success. Toward the end of the night, I was approached by a young entrepreneur who had recently launched her own startup. "Mr. Blake," she said, her voice filled with admiration, "I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. Your story, it's inspiring. It gives people like me hope that we can overcome anything." Her words struck a chord, reminding me of the journey I'd taken, the battles I'd fought, and the lessons I'd learned. "Thank you," I said, shaking her hand. "But remember, it's not about the challenges you face. It's about how you rise above them. And from what I've seen tonight, you're already well on your way." As the night drew to a close, I stepped outside, the cool evening air refreshing against my skin. I looked up at the sky, the stars shining brightly, unbothered by the chaos of the world below. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace, a clarity I hadn't known in years. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. There would always be challenges, uncertainties, and moments of doubt. But I learned that those moments didn't define you. What defined you was how you responded, how you chose to move forward, even when the path seemed uncertain. I thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggle to rebuild. And I realized that, in a way, those experiences had shaped me into the person I was now. Stronger, wiser, more resilient. As I walked to my car, I felt a sense of anticipation for the future. There were still so many possibilities, so many opportunities to create, to grow, to make a difference. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace them all. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, purpose, and the promise of brighter days ahead.